Today, we're going to talk all about something you've probably experienced before and you just didn't realize that you were a part of it. You're listening to the Coastal with Kelly podcast, your go to podcast for waterfront travel destinations, coastal living, and ocean friendly businesses. I'm your host, Kelly Dabrowski. Let's dive in. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Coastal with Kelly podcast. Today, we're talking about something I think you've all been questioning since you listened to the first episode. So if you haven't listened yet, go back and take a listen. It's really short. But today we're going to talk all about something you've probably experienced before and you just didn't realize that you were a part of it. And that is blue tourism. So blue tourism essentially focuses on the water bodies of a destination, often with sustainability considerations. So when I'm using the word blue tourism, I typically am encompassing some sort of sustainability aspect, which we'll get to in a little bit. But you've probably participated in this and didn't realize it when you do things like go scuba diving or whale watching or even fishing. If you've been on a cruise line before, you've been a part of the blue tourism industry. So the reason blue tourism is so important is that it is one of the biggest sectors of the tourism industry. Blue tourism has a profound economic impact, not just in the US, but also abroad, because waterfront destinations like beaches and rivers, those are our most frequently visited destinations. Blue tourism is super significant to the US because even in the US alone, and this is 2018 figures, the blue tourism or ocean-based sector of the tourism industry contributed over $140 billion with a B to the GDP, which essentially goes into our national economy annually. So it's a huge, huge sector for providing things like jobs, right? So the blue tourism industry is also important for job creation. Based on those same 2018 figures, in the US, over 2.5 million people were employed by ocean-based tourism and recreation jobs. So I'm sure that this number has now vastly surpassed 2.5 million. So blue tourism can also impact infrastructure development. Having more tourists in your location can drive investment in things like transportation systems and improving accommodations. So adding hotels, and other facilities that support tourists that also can benefit the communities that the tourists are visiting. So blue tourism also will positively impact local economies, but that comes with a little bit of a grain of salt because you obviously can have the kind of boom and bust cycle where you have peak tourist season and then you have the low season or the shoulder season where there are fewer tourists. But it does ultimately provide an economic boost to these popular destinations. And my personal favorite part to talk about is obviously the environmental benefits. So one example, if you're tuning in from the Chesapeake Bay area, is actually Mallows Bay, which is a national marine sanctuary that protects, we call it a ghost fleet, but it's shipwrecks that are protected, which is actually not in the ocean, but it's in the Potomac. But that just goes to show it's another example of blue tourism that might surprise you. And blue tourism can also provide some social benefits. So there can be opportunities to improve community development. They're, again, similar to what they did in Mallows Bay. There can be examples of cultural preservation, and also just basic education by providing signage in some of these areas. For example, there are places in Hawaii where you'll find signs that talk about how we protect coral reefs. So even though when I'm using the word blue tourism, I always have this undertone of sustainability wrapped up in it, there are also some negative impacts to having a lot of tourists in these areas if it's not managed properly. So for example, if you have too many people in an area, you can end up having marine pollution, whether that's just people losing some of their trash and it's blowing into the water, or if it's just too many people coming to an area and it's unmanaged, you end up having over tourism, which can actually result in closing different destinations. It can also result in requiring advanced reservations. And one example is on the island of Oahu. Hanauma Bay is this beautiful state park. There's a gorgeous coral reef that is a really great opportunity to go snorkeling. It's a really beautiful area. But because there were so many tourists, they actually had to implement a reservation system. So only so many people can come at different times of the day. They also have, when you arrive, you have to watch a video all about how to protect the coral reef so that you're not, kicking your fins on it while you're snorkeling and making sure that you're only using reef safe sunscreen. So these are all strategies that they use to combat some of the negative impacts from having too many tourists in the area, which was a really great solution to still be able to have people visit because it's a really beautiful place to see. But because it's such a popular destination, there had to be some restrictions set in place to still manage the demand to see these beautiful places. Another aspect of this, though, can be that boom and bust cycle that I mentioned earlier. Waterfront destinations tend to have a high season and a low season. Thinking about places like the Caribbean, right? You're right inside of that hurricane belt. So you really don't have a lot of people there in the summer months because there's the higher risk for storms. Sometimes these destinations will close down for the season, even in Galveston, Texas, right? Like where I lived there for 2 years, and there was an obvious change between peak season and low season. So our peak season was in the summer, really spring into summer because the weather there was pretty nice year round. Aside from winter, where, from like end of November into early February, you kind of get this dreary weather, but we had fewer people there. But it was obvious in the fact that it's like you didn't need a reservation to get into a restaurant. You didn't need to fight to find parking. There were fewer people on the beaches. So there's definitely a huge potential for an economic impact as well from this kind of, peak season to low season. But something I'm excited about to dive in a future episode is talking about the future of blue tourism. There is so much untapped potential in some of these locations to expand upon this connection between sustainable and luxury. So I think a lot of people have this misconception that you can't have sustainable tourism and have something be luxurious. And I'm so excited that eventually we're going to get into this and talk about some examples of actually some industry giants in the tourism space that do implement sustainable practices in their business. So organizations like Marriott and Hilton. There's also some other hotels that we'll talk about, like Inca Terra, which is one in Peru. That's one of the first climate neutral hotel chains. We have Iberostar, which is really known for their ocean sustainability. They have a whole program called Wave of Change, where they do like coral reef plantings and their sustainable seafood at all of their restaurants. So I'm really, really excited to jump into that side of things in the coming weeks. So make sure you come back and tune in for more on blue tourism.